over the last 3 to 5 years, we've understood as a company that misinformation is always on, even if it's getting amplified at different levels, right?
So choice is good. We know that consumers want choice. They want tiers, right? So that they feel like varying levels of interest and budget limitations are being taken care of.
Let's say you're recording this podcast, right? You upload it on Pinpoint, right? You will immediately have a transcript in a manner of a minute, right?
For anybody who understands subscription business, subscribers are maybe 1% if you're lucky of your overall user base. But hello and welcome to another episode of Our Own Devices. And again, we have been talking about AI. We might talk about AI again, but finally, after maybe 200 or so episodes, we're going to talk about something I know a little bit about, and that is about news and the publisher ecosystem. So we're going to talk with Google and Kantar about what they see in the publisher ecosystem and what are the new trends. To talk about it, we have with us Durga Raghunath, who is the head of news partnerships India at Google. Hi, Durga.
Hi, Nandu.
And just a disclaimer, she was once my boss.
No one's ever your boss.
That's out. That jury's out on that. So
okay.
And we have with us Chitra Srivastava of Kantar. Chitra, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here.
So I'll start with you, Durga. So could you give a little bit of an overview of how Google is working with the publisher ecosystem? And unlike other countries, India is very different because, even though we call it one publisher ecosystem, you are dealing with multiple languages, very different, mindsets among users. So if you could give an overview of what all you're doing with the publishers.
Yeah, no, great starting point, Nandu. Couple of years ago, I think it's been 2.5 years since I started doing this role. One of our internal discussions at that point was to say, we know the language user opportunity is a very big opportunity, right? We also knew that we were clubbing the user in as the language user too easily, and there will indeed be nuanced differences between the different languages across demographics, as well as we felt that even externally, there were lots of generalities being made, whether you looked at it from the business side, the publishing side, and the user side, right? So we thought that, listen, let's do a study that not only helps us, but helps everyone. And we began this journey with Kantar, where in record time, they spoke to 4,000 users. And I don't know if you remember that research, Nandu, we released it last year. That was the beginning of this languages investment that we've made, right? So over the last 2 years, equipped with this report, we've created a program because it was very clear that there was a gap between the news users' dynamism and the news publishers' digital presence, right? Sites were not fast enough. There were ads that were cluttered. There were no new formats. Multimedia was very poor in terms of general presence on all these digital identities. So we had this opportunity to say, one, let's solve for latency at scale, right? Because the minute you solve for speed, we know access will increase and we know all these other metrics will go up, right? And the program did very well, Nandu, right? 300 publishers participated. Yeah. All of the impact was on very high double digits, right? And now we're on season 2. So one, we are looking at languages at an ecosystem level. Internally, we're also working with several teams in Google to also identify what are premium revenue opportunities that we can help the news publishing ecosystem with. Because one of the insights that the research threw was the language news user is in fact more evolved than the language user, right? And we wanted that advertising message to go out as well. The other insight from the study was also that language users might have a propensity to pay, right? And 1 in 7 respondents, and I think the number was about 20%, 17 to 20% said We are open to paying for fact check news. We are open to paying for news that is explainers. Like there were a few insights there. And I think Kantar
Yeah.
and Google again got very excited, saying, listen, this is another great part B opportunity. So let's double down, because today, again, we are fighting the same generalities or biases that we had about the language user, which is that, oh, language users will never pay. And again,
Yeah.
this what I'm most excited about is this research has proven that there's nearly no obstacle to making the language user pay, Nandu, right? And I'll stop there on languages. The second is the digital transformation piece, right? Where we operate in two ways. One is to say, how can we run innovation challenges? How can we have fact check funds? Like, how can we make sure that the so the way we measure diversity is not just languages but also kinds of publishers, right? And you, I think,
Yeah.
hit upon the complexity at the beginning, but we have to have every kind of publisher, whether deep, small, regional, city, or national, all of them involved, to make Google as diverse a source as it can be for the very diverse user ecosystem, right? So we do a lot of system level work with startups across challenges, startup academies, and so on. But we also do deep work with companies that have the technology capacity, the teams, and the readiness to think about technology a little bit more deeply, Nandu. And there is a readiness factor
Yeah.
there as well. The
Yeah.
last one, and I'll stop there, is our work on tackling misinformation. In the past, we considered, misinformation localized to certain breaking news events or election season. But over the last 3 to 5 years, we've understood as a company that misinformation is always on, even if it's getting amplified at different levels, right? So therefore our investment has been fairly regular. So we now have a 12-month calendar for fact checking, training, for news literacy across the board, as well as amplifying and taking programs up a notch like we did with Shakti during election time.
So I'll just bring in Chitra a little bit. On the first point, Chitra, like I was there when you were presenting today on the data, and I think it sort of validated like things that I have seen, and I have done a little bit of experimentation with subscription in the languages. I don't want to reveal much more after that, but the point is that it is not one market, right? So I guess your data is also showing that like people in Kerala maybe react differently than people in Karnataka.
Yeah.
Give a bit of an overview on what you saw there.
Yeah. So just to set the context a bit, this time we double clicked, as Durga was saying, on people who are going to publishing websites quite frequently, right? So they're active users of publication websites and apps. And what we did is sort of present them with multiple models, ranging from microtransactions, which would have paper content, mini passes, very akin to something that Spotify already does, to subscriptions, and then watching ads to unlock content, which again, you often see in
Yeah.
games. We had a bunch of first party data options. Essentially, at a larger level, what we did see is that people overall, at a national level, more receptive to sharing first party data, using ad to unlock content, then of course subscriptions, right? So within subscriptions, to your point, there was a bit of a variation where we sort of noticed that people who speak or identify as Tamil local language news website users or Kannada speaking news website users, they showed a greater proportion of interest in subscriptions. And this goes from, and there are reasons for it. And these are just hypotheses at the moment, right? But we know that Tamilians are very, very specific about, there's a sense of pride in their language as well, right? Which sort of then makes it important for them to, there's a sense of pride. So, they want content in their preferred language, which is their own language, high quality content, which also then increases the propensity to pay for that local language content. In Karnataka also, you'd see it's a mix, right? So there's a higher propensity. But what we know is that we sample from Bangalore, etc. And some of these markets, in themselves tend to be very, very experimentative, right, with what's coming up. And therefore, what came out is that they have higher receptivity. Subscription was in the top three revenue models in terms of the level of stated level of acceptability that they had. But it is a spectrum, right? So on one hand, we had these two user bases where there was a lot more dialed up interest in subscription. On the other hand, we had users, Malayalam speaking users, right? And they tend to be far more discerning. And what ended up happening there is that when we were looking at, you know, how well differentiated the responses to these different models were, I think the clearest difference came out there, right? So the hierarchy goes that they were very, very interested in newsletter signups, right? So they're interested in newsletter signups, they're interested in watching ads to unlock content because it's a very low risk sort of an effort. You don't have to commit to a long-term,
Yeah.
payment there. They were interested in registering. So, using their mobile phone numbers, etc., etc. And this actually ties into another nuance that we saw amongst non-subscribers, which is that when we were looking at barriers, right? So there were some top deterrents that had resounding resonance across. But Malayalam users in particular, what they had is a bit of skepticism towards the media itself, right? So it came out in two different ways. One of it was about the fact that, you know, I do not trust one single source enough to pay for it. At the second level, it came down to saying that, okay, even if I were to trust, I do not have an understanding or a sense of what is that one reliable app or website that I go out and pay for, right? Because we also have to look at this in context of people don't just subscribe to news. People also subscribe to a wide variety of,
Yeah.
OTT, and there are these different levels of subscriptions that, there's this whole subscription
Without
economy.
even realizing often.
Yes. And therefore, it's very, very important that when people they do a choice making. They have a limited set of budgets. And so we have a spectrum, right? There are markets like Tamil, Kannada speaking markets. In fact, for that matter, the Hindi users, they are over indexed relative to national average on, micro payments like paper content, mini passes, which basically then gives us a broader range of options to experiment with and play with.
If I can come back to you, Durga, a lot of the podcasts that we have done before have been around AI. And if you go to any news conference these days, like AI is the topic that is discussed, and it's often not seen in a positive light. Like you don't know how it's going to impact the business because there are many aspects to it. But I guess AI is something you are also seeing a lot of adoption in the Indian market with, and Google, I guess, has products is also helping publishers, upgrade to the AI race, right?
Yeah, Nandu. I think I'm thinking of it like a funnel nowadays, where
Hmm.
I think when I talk to publishers, and I'm also exposed to the Southeast Asia market a little bit, along with the
Yeah.
India market, and the predominant trend we are seeing in both is that there's a lot of experimentation. Okay,
Hmm.
there's a lot of experimentation, but when you think about organizationally, how much do I want to scale it, or do I want to make it a core part of my business, right? That funnel becomes narrower. And then when you say, is it truly transforming my business? How do I make it transform my business? That funnel becomes very narrow, right? So I
Hmm.
think the way that the market's viewing it now is lot of excitement, but there's a bit of a gap between the opportunity and how do we actually create impact, and a nervousness to do with AI, right? And I
Yeah.
think there's where Google's sort of excited about coming in and plugging that gap. And we typically work very well in this kind of a technology map, right? Where the technology is racing, um,
Hmm.
there's a lot of opportunity, but there is, especially from our partnership perspective, but there is some gap, right, in training, in workshopping, in just enablement, right? This is when we come in and say, okay, what is it we can do to make sure publishers can learn, we can work with them, we can do some enablement, and how do we make sure that we feel like publishers have all the things in their skills and toolbox to take the right decision, right? So that will be one
Yeah.
approach that we think of, and we're already starting to think about that. Later this year we will have a AI hackathon piece as well.
Mhm.
The second piece we're thinking about, and Shailesh spoke about it in the news summit. Pinpoint, for instance, it's a tool that you might be aware of as well. We're thinking of it as reporter driven technology. Like, how can we help the future of reporting from a local newsroom perspective? And their Pinpoint has been such a runaway success, right? So for your listener, the basic thing that Pinpoint does is, there are three key powerful things, right? One, let's say you're recording this podcast, right? You upload it on Pinpoint, right? You will immediately have a transcript in a
Yeah.
manner of a minute, right? If you want to translate that transcript to Hindi with about a 75% confidence interval, you will be able to translate it to Hindi. One of your editors can look at it and actually publish it as a
Mhm.
Hindi transcript. You
Yeah.
can also search for a bunch of things within it, right? So there's a audio power, there's a tagging power, there's a document search power. Um, it's I think we got so much feedback even during elections when reporters were using it on the ground, right? And you can upload a PDF, it reads that PDF, and there's great intelligence you can extract. So imagine I'm a
Yeah.
government, like, anyway, you can imagine. I won't go on. Nandu, you
Yes.
can clearly see I'm excited
Yeah.
about the product. So that is the beginning of our thinking.
Yeah.
There's definitely thinking that is happening around the organization as a whole and how we can support. But there is tool based thinking and there is organizational thinking as well. Is sort of
Yeah.
where I'd stop. Yeah.
Also, you have technology that is helping bridge this unique language divide that we have in India, right? And and, and I have seen over the years a lot of what I would call like Noida-based thinking about how to tackle the Indian market, which doesn't work. It doesn't go down south. It doesn't go to the east. It doesn't go to the west. Like because you are thinking from a very you know North India or NCR kind of a focus. So how is Google helping solve that? And I know you guys have been putting in a lot of work on it over the years.
I think translation has been successful, right? I think globally, there's definitely been success to do with translation as well. So both in terms of language as well as in terms of formats, right? So can you take a text
Yeah.
article, audio, video? Can you take a video and make it audio, text? Like, a lot of that format fluidity is happening. I think language fluidity, like Shailesh said, I think every year we're getting better and better. Now it's a matter of months. I am not the expert on this, in terms of, for instance, the fact that we've launched Gemini in Indian languages for me is a huge sign in itself, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of local work happening and there's a lot of global work happening as well, right? And at least with the way that the pace at which we are developing, I can see a great excitement and confidence within the company. In terms of um, how do we think about language publishers, right? I think one of the things we found out when we started doing the Indian languages program is that even within digitization, there is a pecking order, right? There is very basic digitization where you're right in saying, and she was talking about the Tamil market, it's a very magazine heavy market, right? It's been a political
Yeah.
satire market. It's a very evolved, good market, right? But I'd say only 10% is digitized, Nandu. So one is basic
Yep. True.
digitization. Then those who are digitized don't know how to invest. Then those who have invested haven't made apps. So there are so many steps to this, right? And we are involved in every step. So we came in with the same premise, thinking, oh my God, users are growing, but content is not enough. How do we bridge that system
Yeah.
level issue? But then we realize, oh my God, if there's a lot of content but it's not even reaching the user, right? Which is why we went a step back and started solving for latency
Mhm.
before discovery,
Yeah.
to aid discovery, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So if I can come back to Chitra, like you also mentioned how you have a lot of non-subscribers who are sort of holding out. And again, like for anybody who understands subscription business, subscribers are maybe 1% if you're lucky of your overall user base. But you have the potential, and again, the fact is that users across the world are getting or are accepting different types of subscriptions. So new subscription will happen maybe sometime in due course. But in India, what are the trends that you're seeing? What are the reasons why people are not subscribing?
So that's a very good question. When we went out, when we originally did the research, there were two legs to it. There was a huge call, which then inputted into the quant one, where we sort of validated these barriers, right? And we went in with a long list of 16 barriers, right? And as you would
Yeah.
expect, people have this sense that what's out there available free of cost, it's sufficient enough. There's obviously that sense because non-subscribers relative to subscribers, right? So subscribers is one cohort. They're very discerning. They're serious news hunters. Non-subscribers tend to have a less is more approach. So expectedly, they would say that. They would also talk about India is a value conscious market, right? So they would also talk about things like we have limited budget. But what really stood out to us is that apart from these two barriers, the other primary barriers were actually barriers that we can address in the ecosystem, right? So they spoke about the biggest barrier, in fact, the top barrier or the deterrent was complex pricing plans. So I'm overwhelmed with too many plans and prices that are there. The differences could be vague. We know from subscribers, when we spoke to subscribers, we know that there is a whole journey, right? So they're not just comparing. Indians tend to compare, right? Information asymmetry is being removed. So Indians have a habit of comparing when they buy a mobile phone or anything just to ensure they're getting the maximum bang for their buck. And because of that, when we know from subscribers they're comparing more than worst is you compare on your particular platform where there could be more than one tier. The second is that you're comparing across websites also. And there's no streamlined way to actually do those comparisons and arrive at a decision, right? So choice is good. We know that consumers want choice. They want tiers, right? So that they feel like varying levels of interest and budget limitations are being taken care of. But at what point do we say there are too many choices? Because if you have too many choices, you're essentially paralyzed by those choices. So that overwhelm is there. Uh, then they also speak about the fact that there's a lack of free trial, right? They don't know. They essentially don't know how their experience would change post payment. They don't know what content features, there's no clear outlining of that. And they also spoke about, no free trials. And another big thing that emerged in terms of barriers, and this was repeated across in terms of enablers also, is that payment terms and cancellation terms are seen as inflexible at the moment. They're probably appropriate for the ecosystem, maybe even borrowed from West to some extent. But Indian users have a typical tendency, they have their own preferences, which is where we sort of went down and sort of understood that as well. So to say that, given that we have complex pricing plans, we have payment inflexibility, lack of trials, essentially what we're seeing is that the value proposition is not clear to the consumer, right? And if the value proposition itself is not clear, and I mean, in one of the qualitative interviews, there was a bit of a consumer speak, and I'm paraphrasing here, which is that OTT brands, they market. Nobody markets news brands, right? So we're not really marketing them, and there's no clarity on what am I getting, how is my experience changing. I don't have
Hmm.
access to
Yeah.
samples of paid content that you're asking me to pay for. So then how do I base my decision on that, right? So different people have different risk appetites, but I think it's important to think about whether we are making it easier for consumers to choose us and choose us with a sense of reassurance and confidence that we're actually worth the money, so to say. So that's certainly very important.
Before we wind up, Durga, can I ask you about we had an election year, and US is going into a very interesting election season now. And you guys have done a lot of work on fact check and putting a check on fake news. So if you could explain for our audience what exactly does or what exactly did Shakti Collective do, and how it helped the entire ecosystem during the elections.
Sorry, Nandu. Thank you. This is my second favorite topic, and I've been relentless about it. So firstly, like I said, the fact checking work has been fairly sustained over the last 2, 3 years. But I think when we spoke with fact checkers and publishers late last year, as we were thinking about what is our election plan, what do we need to do, we knew we wanted to amp up training. right? But there were a number of key points that came across when we said, okay, what are the issues that is preventing us from reaching more audiences? And we realized that in that chain there were two things that were extremely important. One was the fact checker was publishing a fact check, but publishers were not amplifying those fact checks, right? So sometimes they were getting
Yeah.
lost in that chain. Second, enough publishers were not publishing fact checks as well, right? And therefore, the third one was, why does it take so long for a fact check to get published, right? So I think we were looking at time to publishing, we were looking at amplification, and we were also looking at this again disparity back to languages, right? It's great in some languages, it's not in others. So I think the way we
Yeah.
thought about it when we designed Shakti, we said, listen, elections is a time where as an industry we can come together, and therefore we got publishers across languages, across formats, across, products that cater to young and cater to a more mature audience, and we got training also completely leveled up, saying how, because it's an area where it's changing constantly, Nandu, right? And we realized again when we
Yeah.
spoke to publisher that just because they got trained last year doesn't mean they don't want to get trained this year, right? So we amped up training, we got more expertise, deep fakes, formats, all our Google experts across tools, industry experts like Professor Mayank Vatsa, like advising us and even actually doing the training, right? And making us help more, making us develop more curriculum, and we so it was three stages. So basically we did the training, then we began the work, and like I was saying earlier, then this flywheel sort of took over, Nandu, where every publishing house
Yeah.
started publishing each other's fact checks, doing more, and we felt collectively this collaboration has legs as well, right? And I'm
Mm.
very hopeful that we can also extend our work with publishers and fact checkers over the course of this year.
And that seems to be a better model for fact check than having a lot of people do their own fact checks and keep it in those silos, right?
Yeah, no, great point. I think plugging the power of this collaboration is not just that everyone's working together. Why is it
Yeah.
working? Because everyone selfishly has realized that it's better for them, and that's the true power, right? When it starts taking
Yeah.
a momentum of its own.
Yes.
So now everyone is very invested, and Google has a huge interest in supporting this over time, because it's helping all our tools expand in languages, expand across formats, and so on.
So, Durga and Chitra, thanks for being on the show. It was very insightful. I'm sure, our listeners who are readers also and subscribers, hopefully someday, will have an open mind uh, about technology coming into news and the possibility of a subscription.
Thank you so much, Nandu.
Thank you.
Thank
Always a
you.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks.